The evening settled over the town like a heavy velvet curtain, deepening the shadows in my small living room. I had just settled into the well-worn comfort of my brown leather armchair, ready to lose myself in the pages of a dog-eared novel that had been my companion for the better part of a week. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a warm blanket, soothing and serene. My cat, Jasper, lay sprawled on the windowsill, his eyes half closed, lulled by the gentle rhythm of the neighborhood beyond. It was a typical autumn evening. The air was crisp with the promise of approaching winter. The faint aroma of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke wafted in through the open window, mingling with the subtle scent of brewing coffee emanating from the kitchen. The world outside seemed like a distant, gentle hum, reduced to a soft murmur by the walls of my home. But then, that serene calm was disrupted by the unexpected ring of my doorbell. The sound was sharp and jarring, slicing through the tranquility like a knife. I hesitated for a moment, puzzled. I hadn't been expecting anyone, and it was an unusual hour for visitors. Jasper lifted his head, ears twitching with mild interest, before returning to his languid repose. Curiosity piqued, I set the book aside, marking my place with a folded corner, and moved to the front door. The glow of the porch light cast an amber halo over the small foyer as I peered through the peephole. There, standing in the fading light, was a delivery man. He held a large pizza box, the logo of a local pizzeria emblazoned in bright red. I didn't recall ordering pizza, but then again, perhaps I had made some absent-minded mistake. The humdrum of daily life had a way of blurring the lines between intentions and actions. Opening the door, I was greeted by the delivery man's polite nod. He was nondescript, with a cap pulled low over his brow, obscuring most of his features. "Evening," he said, his voice a monotone drawl. "Everything pizza. Delivery for you." I blinked in surprise. "I think there's been a mistake," I replied, glancing at the box. "I didn't order any pizza." The delivery man shrugged, unfazed. "It's already been paid for," he insisted, extending the box towards me. I hesitated, a small frown creasing my brow. My hand reached out almost instinctively, accepting the box. It was warm beneath my fingers, the aroma of melted cheese and a myriad of toppings drifting up to meet me. There was something unusually compelling about it, an allure that was hard to pinpoint, but impossible to ignore. "Have a good night," the delivery man said curtly, turning on his heel before I could protest further. I watched him retreat into the shadows, his figure dissolving into the obscurity of the night. Perplexed but unwilling to let a perfectly good pizza go to waste, I carried the box back into the living room. Setting it down on the coffee table, I lifted the lid. Inside, the pie was a kaleidoscope of ingredients. Everything imaginable adorned its surface. Peppers, mushrooms, olives, pepperoni, sausage, onions, and more, all nestled atop a bubbling sea of cheese. As I surveyed the pizza, I couldn't shake an odd sensation, a prickle at the back of my neck that was both familiar and foreign. But the scent was intoxicating, the warmth of the pizza comforting against the coolness that had settled in the house. Besides, a free meal was a welcome surprise on any occasion. I took a slice, the cheese stretching in gooey strands as I pulled it free. The first bite was a riot of flavors, each distinct yet blending into a harmonious whole. It was delicious, almost unnervingly so. I found myself reaching for another slice, and then another, each one as irresistible as the last. As I ate, the room seemed to shift subtly around me. The shadows deepened, elongating in ways that defied the logic of the soft lamplight. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in a slow and steady rhythm. A whisper of sound danced at the edges of my consciousness, too faint to discern but persistent in its presence. I paused mid-bite, the unease from earlier returning with a vengeance. Jasper, who had been watching me with a lazy eye, suddenly perked up, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. His fur bristled, and a low growl rumbled in his throat, a sound I had never heard him make before. Heart thumping, I placed the half-eaten slice back in the box and turned slowly. The room was unchanged, yet it felt different, as if the very air had taken on a life of its own. The whispering sound grew louder, forming a chorus of unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I shook my head, trying to dispel the odd sensation. It was just a pizza, I told myself, a strange but delicious dinner that had arrived unexpectedly. Perhaps my imagination was running wild, fueled by the eerie quiet of the night. But as I sat there, the murmurs continued, weaving through the fabric of the room like an unseen current. Sleep eluded me that night. Even as I lay in bed, the echo of those whispers lingered, slipping through the cracks of consciousness each time I drifted towards slumber. They were elusive, always on the verge of clarity, but never quite revealing themselves. It was disconcerting, unsettling enough to keep my eyes open long into the night. The following day dawned with a heavy overcast sky, the kind that seemed to press down upon the world, dulling colors and muffling sounds. I went about my morning routine with a sense of detachment, my thoughts snagging on the peculiar events of the previous night. The pizza box remained on the coffee table, a silent testament to my curiosity and the subsequent unease it had wrought. As I prepared breakfast, I found myself glancing towards the living room repeatedly, expecting, or perhaps fearing, some change. Jasper, ever intuitive, followed me around with an unusual vigilance, his eyes never straying far from my own. The day passed in a blur of mundane tasks, each movement tinged with the lingering apprehension that shadowed my thoughts. The world outside continued its ceaseless motion, oblivious to the strange undercurrent that had taken hold within my home. The whispers were absent during the day, a fact that should have reassured me, but instead heightened my anticipation for their return. Evening arrived with the same inexorable certainty as the night before. As darkness crept in, the sense of unease intensified, a tangible presence that hovered just beyond the edges of perception. I considered disposing of the pizza, but a part of me hesitated, drawn inexplicably to its mystery. When the doorbell rang again, I nearly jumped out of my skin. The sudden jolt broke the spell of my thoughts, and I went to the door with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. There, once again, was a delivery man, although this one was different from the last. He wore the same uniform, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his cap. "Another delivery for you," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He held out another pizza box, identical to the one from the previous night. I opened my mouth to protest, but he was gone before I could utter a word, disappearing into the night as swiftly and silently as the one before. I stood there, bewildered, the new box heavy in my hands. This time, I approached the pizza with caution, setting it beside the first on the coffee table. Jasper sat at my feet, his tail flicking back and forth in an agitated rhythm. I lifted the lid, already expecting what I would find. The pizza was identical to the first, an everything pizza, its surface a chaotic blend of toppings. But this time, there was something else. A note. It was tucked under the edge of the box, a small slip of paper that bore a single, enigmatic line. "The feast begins when the hunger never ends." A chill ran down my spine as I read the words, their meaning as cryptic as the events that had unfolded. The whispers returned, rising in a crescendo of sound that filled the room, an ethereal symphony that defied comprehension. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. There was something at play here, something beyond the realm of reason and logic. The pizzas, the whispers, the unnerving sense of being watched. It all wove together into a tapestry of dread. That night, sleep was a distant memory. The whispers were relentless, a cacophony of sound that ebbed and flowed like the tide, drowning out any hope of rest. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart a relentless drumbeat in the silence. The following days unfolded in a similar pattern. Each evening brought a new delivery, each pizza accompanied by a new note, each more cryptic than the last. The whispers grew in intensity, their presence a constant haunting accompaniment to my days and nights. My world had narrowed to the confines of my home, the outside a distant memory overshadowed by the dark intrigue that had taken root in my life. The notes were varied, each one a piece of a puzzle that eluded understanding. In the hollow of night, the answers lie. A choice once made cannot be unmade. Each phrase sent a shiver through me, their meanings tantalizingly close, yet always just out of reach. I became consumed by the mystery, drawn deeper into its web with each passing day. Sleep-deprived and worn thin by the relentless tension, I scoured the internet for answers, searching for any hint of a connection, any explanation for the inexplicable. But there was nothing, no record of similar occurrences, no mention of cursed pizzas or whispering shadows. One evening, as I stared at the latest delivery, a realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. Each pizza was a reflection of my own desires, my own cravings manifested in edible form. The everything pizza, a metaphor for my insatiable curiosity, my hunger for answers that seemed forever out of reach. The understanding brought with it a new sense of dread, a fear that had been lurking just beneath the surface. The whispers were not just noise, they were voices, a chorus of unseen watchers who reveled in my perplexity. The pizzas were a conduit, a way for them to reach me, to ensnare me in their web. As I faced this revelation, something shifted within me. A resolve, a determination to break free of the cycle that had ensnared me. I gathered the pizzas, the boxes stacked in a precarious tower, and carried them to the back door. The air was cold and still, the night holding its breath as I stepped out into the yard. There, beneath the pale light of the moon, I set the boxes down, their presence a weight that pressed upon me. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm my senses, but I stood firm, my heart a steady rhythm that anchored me to the moment. With deliberate care, I opened the boxes, one by one, and scattered the pizzas across the ground. The toppings blended into a mosaic of color, the cheese glistening in the moonlight. The whispers reached a crescendo, a final, desperate plea that echoed through the night. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, silence fell. The air was still, the world holding its breath in anticipation. I stood there, the chill of the night seeping into my bones, waiting for some sign, some indication that the ordeal was over. But there was nothing, only the quiet, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. I turned back to the house, leaving the scattered remnants of the pizzas behind. Inside, the air felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Jasper greeted me at the door, his purr a comforting rumble that eased the tension from my shoulders. I sank into the armchair, exhaustion finally claiming its due. The whispers were gone, their presence a fading memory that lingered at the edges of my mind. As sleep finally claimed me, I knew the strangest chapter of my life had come to a close. But the fear remained, a shadow that lurked in the corners of my thoughts. The world was unchanged, yet I was not. The memory of the pizzas, the whispers, the nights spent in restless anticipation, they were a part of me now, a reminder of the unknown that lies just beyond the edges of perception. I had faced the darkness and emerged, but the question remained: had I truly broken free? Or was this just another turn in the labyrinth? The fear was no longer a thing to be banished. It was a companion, a reminder of the mysteries that linger in the shadows, always watching, always waiting. I had always been the kind of person who enjoyed taking the less traveled paths. It was a quirk I cultivated, often seeking out the peculiar and the uncharted. So, when I took the job at Mario's Pizza, it wasn't just for the money. It was a curiosity-driven decision, an opportunity to wander through the winding streets of my town, delivering hot slices of delight to hungry customers. Most nights were uneventful. I'd navigate familiar roads, pass through neighborhoods I'd come to know, like the back of my hand, and exchange pleasantries with regulars who'd grown accustomed to my presence. But one night, a particularly foggy Friday, I received a delivery order that took me to Tenor Street, a place I had never ventured before. I asked around, hoping my colleagues might have some insights into the area, but they merely shrugged, as if disinclined to discuss it. With the pizza box warming my passenger seat, I set off into the fog. The mist coiled around my car like a living creature, obscuring the road ahead and transforming familiar shapes into eerie silhouettes. Tenor Street wasn't marked on any map I checked. It wasn't far from the main thoroughfares, yet it felt isolated, tucked away from the bustling suburban life I was used to. The street appeared suddenly, a narrow lane flanked by dense, shadowy trees, whose branches stretched toward the sky like bony fingers. I drove slowly, the car's headlights slicing through the fog to reveal glimpses of crumbling pavement and overgrown hedgerows. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, a quiet that pressed upon my ears and made the gentle hum of my engine feel like a roar. I checked the delivery address again. An old, dilapidated house stood at the end of the street. Its facade was hidden behind thick ivy, and its windows were dark, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I parked the car and grabbed the pizza, hesitating for a moment as I glanced around. There were no signs of life, no welcoming porch lights or barking dogs, just the oppressive silence and the cold, creeping fog. I shook off the unease and approached the house, my footsteps echoing ominously on the wooden steps of the porch. I rang the doorbell, a shrill sound that seemed to reverberate through the dense air. As I waited, I noticed something peculiar, a feeling of being watched, as if eyes were peering at me from the darkness beyond the trees. I shook my head, dismissing the sensation as a trick of the light and my own overactive imagination. The door swung open, and I was greeted by a man who looked as though he had stepped out of another time. His clothes were worn and frayed, his hair a wild tangle of gray. "Pizza's here," I said, offering a smile that felt strained. The man looked at me with eyes that seemed too large for his face, and nodded. "Thank you," he replied in a voice that was surprisingly soft, almost melodic. He handed me a few crumpled bills and took the pizza, his fingers brushing mine for a moment, a touch that felt unnaturally cold. I turned to leave, eager to be away from the strange house and its enigmatic occupant. As I stepped off the porch, a rustling sound caught my attention. I paused, straining to hear through the fog, but the noise was gone as quickly as it had come. I shrugged it off and returned to my car, eager to complete my shift and head home. But as I drove back down Tenor Street, the feeling of being watched persisted, growing stronger with each passing second. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadowy figure trailing behind. The street, however, remained deserted, and I told myself I was being ridiculous. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the experience. It lingered in the back of my mind, a small, persistent itch that refused to be ignored. Deliveries to Tenor Street became a regular occurrence, and each visit deepened my unease. The man at the dilapidated house was always there, always waiting with those two large eyes and the chilling touch. I began to notice other things too. Whispered voices in the fog, fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision, and that ever-present sensation of being watched. One night, as I prepared for another delivery to the house on Tenor Street, a coworker pulled me aside. "Be careful out there," she said, her voice low and serious. "There's something strange about that place." I nodded, unsure of what to say. Her words mirrored the unspoken fears that had been growing within me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Nevertheless, I set out once more, determined to complete my task quickly and return to the warmth and safety of the pizzeria. As I approached the house, the fog seemed thicker than ever, swirling around my car in an almost deliberate manner. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if I were about to cross a line I couldn't return from. I parked the car and took a moment to steady my nerves before grabbing the pizza and stepping into the cold night air. This time, the porch light was on, casting an unnatural glow that only served to accentuate the darkness surrounding it. I rang the doorbell, and the door opened almost immediately. The man stood there, his eyes even more piercing in the light. I handed him the pizza and turned to leave, eager to escape his unnerving presence. But as I stepped off the porch, I heard a voice, a perfect mimicry of my own, call out to me from the darkness. "Wait!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice echoed in the fog, bouncing off the trees and surrounding me. I turned slowly, my mind struggling to process the impossibility of what I'd just heard. The man was standing in the doorway, unmoving, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. The fog seemed to shift, and I caught a glimpse of something, a shape, a figure indistinct and elusive, hovering at the edge of my vision. It called out again, using my voice with eerie precision. The sound was wrong, twisted, as if it had been filtered through layers of darkness and deceit. I backed away, panic rising in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to run, to flee this place and never look back. But curiosity tugged at me, a dangerous allure that compelled me to take one more step into the unknown. The figure in the fog seemed to sense my hesitation. It shifted, revealing more of itself, a form that defied logic, a monstrous entity whose features eluded clarity. It moved with a grace that belied its size, slipping through the mist with unsettling ease. "Come closer," it beckoned, the voice now a twisted amalgamation of my own and something else, something ancient and unearthly. Fear and fascination warred within me, each pulling me in opposite directions. I took a shaky breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs and ground me in the reality of the situation. Whatever this thing was, it was using mimicry, trying to lure me into its grasp. In the distance, I heard the sound of a car engine, my salvation, a reminder of the world beyond this haunted street. I turned on my heel and ran, ignoring the creature's calls and the man's watchful gaze. The fog seemed to clutch at my limbs, slowing my progress and sapping my strength. But I pushed through, driven by a primal need to survive. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, leaving Tenor Street and its dark mysteries behind. As I drove, the sensation of being watched began to fade, replaced by relief and an overwhelming desire to put as much distance as possible between myself and that cursed place. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of what I'd experienced. I questioned my sanity, replayed the events in my mind, and wondered if the fog had somehow played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was something lurking on Tenor Street, something old and malevolent, using mimicry to ensnare the unwary. I never returned to Tenor Street after that night. I made excuses, swapped shifts, and eventually left the job at Mario's Pizza altogether. Life moved on, and the memories faded into the background, a ghost story I rarely spoke of. Yet the fear lingered, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. Even now, I sometimes catch glimpses of movement in the fog, hear voices in the night that sound unnervingly familiar. And in those moments, I remember the creature on Tenor Street, waiting in the darkness, ready to wear the skin of its next victim. The night started like any other. I sat in my favorite old armchair, a remnant of my college days, now residing in the corner of my cramped living room. The fabric was worn and frayed, a testament to countless late-night study sessions and nostalgic reminiscences. A soft glow from the lamp bathed the room in a warm golden hue, offering a comforting contrast to the chill of the autumn air that crept through the cracked window panes. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees lining Wilhelmina Drive, sending a cascade of leaves skittering across the pavement like a murmuring, unseen crowd. It was a quiet neighborhood, one where the most exciting event was the weekly garbage collection. I had always found solace in its predictability, the serene rhythm of suburban life, offering a counterpoint to the chaos that often swirled in my mind. That night, as I sipped from a mug of herbal tea, I allowed my thoughts to drift aimlessly. The ticking of the clock marked time at an agonizingly slow pace, each second pulling me further into a meditative state. I was on the verge of slipping into a peaceful doze when a peculiar sensation washed over me, a sudden and inexplicable feeling of being observed. I shook the thought from my mind, dismissing it as a trick of fatigue. Yet, as I glanced toward the window, the shadow of movement caught my eye. It was brief, almost too quick to process, a flash of light darting between the trees. I leaned forward, squinting to pierce the darkness outside. Nothing. Just the whispering leaves and the soft glow of streetlights casting their nets over the asphalt. Muttering under my breath, I dismissed it again, attributing the disturbance to my overactive imagination. It was a defense mechanism, one that I had honed over years of suppressing inconvenient truths. I returned to my armchair, drawing a blanket over my legs, and attempted to recapture the elusive serenity that had just been within reach. A sharp beep from my phone interrupted my efforts. Its screen glowed brightly, an unexpected text message from an unknown number. I frowned as I read the words. "Stay away from Wilhelmina Drive tonight." A chill settled over me, more profound than any caused by the creeping autumn air. The words were simple, yet brimming with an understated urgency that demanded attention. I grappled with the message, attempting to reconcile its warning with the mundanity of my life. Wilhelmina Drive was just a road, a harmless artery of suburban life that led to the supermarket, the park, and the quiet peace of my evening walks. It was ridiculous to think of it as a source of danger, yet the warning lingered, seeping into my thoughts like a slow poison. Despite the logical part of my mind arguing against it, curiosity tugged at my senses, urging me to investigate. I resisted at first, trying to distract myself with television and meaningless internet browsing. But the allure of the unknown, of the bizarre warning, was too powerful to ignore. As the hours ticked by, I finally succumbed to its pull. I grabbed my coat, a thin barrier against the night's chill, and slipped my feet into a pair of worn sneakers. My mind raced with the possibilities of what I might encounter, everything from a simple prank to something more sinister. As I stepped out onto the porch, the air was crisp and clear, the kind that invigorated the senses and heightened awareness. Wilhelmina Drive was barely a block away, and as I approached, I noticed that the street was eerily quiet. No cars passed, no laughter from nearby houses, just the persistent rustle of the trees. I hesitated at the entrance to the street, the memory of the text message pulsing in my mind like a warning beacon. Yet, instead of turning back, I began to walk. The road stretched before me, a winding path of shadows and light. I felt an unsettling weight settle over me, as if I had crossed an invisible threshold into a world where the familiar rules no longer applied. I walked slowly, my footsteps muffled by fallen leaves, the sound barely registering in the expansive silence. As I made my way down the street, I noticed something peculiar. A car parked at the curb, its interior dark and silent. It was an old model, its paint faded and peeling, something that seemed out of place even in this quiet neighborhood. I felt a strange compulsion to approach it, my curiosity overriding the instinct to retreat. When I reached the car, I peered into the window, seeing nothing but shadows. I circled it, my breath forming clouds in the cold air, the uncomfortable sense that I was being watched, returning with greater intensity. Suddenly, the headlights flickered to life, their beams cutting through the darkness with startling clarity. The car roared to life, engine revving as if in response to an unseen command. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The car lurched forward slightly, then stopped, the headlights blinking insistently. It was then that I realized the pattern. 3 quick flashes, a pause, then 3 more, a signal, a warning. I remembered the urban legend my friend had once told me about. A car that warned of impending danger, a spectral driver with a penchant for saving lives. But this was no comforting legend. The flashes were urgent, insistent, and I could feel the pulse of danger in the air, an unseen threat lurking just beyond my perception. As I backed away, the car's headlights continued their cryptic dance, a silent alarm that sent chills down my spine. Panicked, I turned and ran, the rhythmic pounding of my feet echoing down the deserted street. I didn't stop until I reached the sanctuary of my porch, the door slamming shut behind me with a finality that seemed to cut off the chaos outside. I leaned against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, heart still racing from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Back inside, I paced the small confines of my living room, my mind grappling with the events I had just witnessed. The car, the warning flashes, it was all too surreal, too reminiscent of a horror movie trope come to life. Yet, no amount of logical reasoning could dispel the lingering fear that had settled into the pit of my stomach. Sleep was elusive that night. Each creak of the floorboards, each sigh of the wind outside, sent my imagination spiraling into overdrive. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events over and over, like a broken record. The warning had felt so personal, so directed, and the question of why still haunted me. By morning, the world had returned to its usual mundane state. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow that felt almost mocking in its normalcy. I hesitated before venturing outside again, my steps tentative as I surveyed the street from my front porch. Wilhelmina Drive was as I had left it, serene, unbothered by the supernatural drama that had unfolded the night before. The car was gone, leaving behind no evidence of its eerie message. I half hoped to see it parked where it had been, to find some proof that it hadn't all been a figment of my imagination. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself unable to shake the experience. It lurked at the edges of my consciousness, a question mark hanging over the fabric of my reality. I became hyper-aware of every detail on Wilhelmina Drive, scrutinizing every parked car, every shadow, for signs of the sinister presence I had encountered. As I settled back into my routine, the warning that had once filled my thoughts began to fade, replaced by the demands of daily life. Yet, every so often, I would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of light, a shadow darting between the trees, and my heart would leap into my throat, the memory of that night returning with gut-wrenching clarity. I never did discover the source of the warning or the unseen threat it had promised. The car remained an enigma, its intentions as elusive as the shadows that danced along Wilhelmina Drive. But the experience left its mark, a reminder of the thin veil between the world we know and the strange, inexplicable events that lurk just beyond our grasp. In the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees and the night stretched endlessly before me, I would find myself wondering about the car and its spectral driver. What had they seen? What danger had they perceived that had prompted their cryptic message? And perhaps more unsettlingly, would they return? The questions lingered, unanswered, a spectral presence haunting the corners of my mind. I had no choice but to live with the uncertainty, to accept the reality that sometimes the world holds secrets it refuses to share. The experience had changed me, leaving me both wary and strangely grateful for the warning that had come in the form of flickering headlights on a quiet suburban street. It was a reminder of the unknown, of the mysteries that lay hidden in the ordinary and the extraordinary alike. And though I had returned to my life, the comforting illusion of safety restored, the memory of that night on Wilhelmina Drive would forever cast its long, eerie shadow. It was the kind of evening when the air felt thick with the promise of rain, even as the skies remained obstinately clear. The sun was setting behind a horizon of jagged trees, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. I had just returned from my daily jog around the neighborhood, a quiet enclave on the outskirts of town, where houses were spaced generously apart, each with its own stretch of land. Our driveway, a winding path lined with towering oaks, had always felt like a secure cocoon, safely nestling our home from the busy world beyond. Life in this part of town was predictably serene, almost idyllic in its isolation. The only sounds that occasionally broke the silence were the rustling leaves and the distant chirp of crickets. My wife, Emily, and I had moved here a few years ago, craving a retreat from the relentless pace of the city. Our evenings were typically spent in peaceful companionship, her nose buried in a book while I toiled away at my desk, papers sprawled before me. It was a comforting monotony, one that we both cherished deeply. That evening, however, a sense of unease began to creep in, as faint as the first tremors of an earthquake. As I settled into my evening routine, Emily called out from the living room, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Did you notice the car parked at the end of our driveway?" I hadn't. My mind had been elsewhere, preoccupied with the lingering tasks of the day. But now that she mentioned it, a vague recollection surfaced, a fleeting glance at a darkened silhouette stationed just beyond the threshold of our property. It seemed out of place, like a smudge on a pristine canvas. "Probably just someone lost, checking their directions," I replied, though my words carried an edge of uncertainty. It wasn't uncommon for drivers to stray into our secluded corner, misled by unreliable GPS systems. Yet, something about the presence of that car nagged at me, refusing to be dismissed so easily. As the evening wore on, the car remained a stubborn fixture at the periphery of our world. Emily and I exchanged uneasy glances, each of us silently willing the other to suggest a course of action. Finally, I resolved to investigate, to confront this small anomaly before it could swell into a larger concern. The air outside was cooling rapidly, the first whispers of nightfall cutting through the remnants of warmth. I made my way down the driveway, each step crunching softly against the gravel. The vehicle stood still in the dim light, a nondescript sedan, colored a shade of blue so dark it appeared almost black. I approached it cautiously, feeling the pulse of my apprehension quicken. As I drew nearer, I noted with growing discomfort that the car appeared deserted. Its windows were up, obscuring any view inside, and the air around it was eerily still. I circled the vehicle, hesitant to touch it, as though it might spring to life at the slightest provocation. After another moment's hesitation, I knocked gently on the driver's side window. Silence. Not even the faintest stir from within. I peered through the glass, the interior shrouded in shadow, yielding nothing but uncertainty. For reasons I couldn't quite articulate, a shiver raced down my spine. Returning to the house, I found Emily waiting anxiously by the door. Her expression mirrored my own mounting unease. "No one in the car?" I said, attempting to sound more confident than I felt. Maybe they went for a walk or needed to clear their head. But as the words left my lips, their implausibility struck me. Who would choose to wander down a secluded driveway in the gathering dark, leaving their car unguarded and locked? The question lingered, a specter hovering between us as the evening deepened into night. The hours slipped by in oppressive silence, the clock ticking with a rhythm that seemed louder than usual. We tried to resume our routines, but our attention kept straying back to the window, to the dark shape that loomed at the edge of our property. Sleep came reluctantly that night, filled with nebulous dreams that dissolved into blackness as soon as I awoke. When morning arrived, it brought with it a chill that seeped into our bones. Emily and I exchanged wary glances over breakfast, the unspoken question hanging between us. Was the car still there? I ventured outside once more. the morning light casting long shadows across the grass. There it was, unmoved, like a sentinel watching over our home. My resolve hardened. This time, I intended to get some answers. Returning to the car, I tried the doors, finding them locked fast. A closer inspection revealed nothing new. No clues, no signs of who might own this vehicle or why it had been abandoned here. But as I leaned against the driver's side door, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something small and white was peeking from beneath the windshield wiper. With growing curiosity, I extracted the object, a folded piece of paper, slightly yellowed with age. It felt oddly out of place, as though it belonged to a different time. Unfolding it carefully, I found a single line scrawled in an untidy hand. "The truth lies within." A cryptic message, offering neither explanation nor comfort. It was the kind of thing one might expect to find in a mystery novel, not in real life. Yet, there it was, undeniably real and profoundly unsettling. Emily listened intently as I recounted my discovery, her brow furrowing in thought. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, the weight of the unknown pressing down heavily upon us both. The rest of the day passed in an uneasy blur. We kept to our routines, but the presence of the car anchored us to a reality that felt increasingly surreal. I contacted the local authorities, hoping they might shed some light on the enigma. They promised to send someone to investigate, but warned that it might take time, given the area's low priority. As afternoon gave way to evening, we found ourselves once more peering out the window, our gaze drawn inexorably to the car. A sense of vigilance took root in our hearts, each of us on edge, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension that had wrapped itself around our lives. The following day dawned gray and overcast, a cold wind sweeping across the landscape. True to their word, the police arrived mid-morning, 2 officers stepping out of their patrol car with an air of deliberate calm. I greeted them, explaining the situation as best I could. They nodded, asked a few cursory questions, and then proceeded to inspect the mysterious vehicle. We watched from a distance as they worked, their movements methodical, professional. They checked the doors, the windows, attempting to glean some information from the nondescript car. Finally, one of the officers retrieved a set of tools, preparing to unlock the door. With a few deft movements, the lock clicked open and the door swung wide. The officers peered inside, their expressions unreadable. After a moment, they called us over, gesturing for us to join them. Apprehension coiled like a serpent in my gut as we approached. The interior of the car was disheveled, papers strewn across the seats, an empty water bottle rolling on the floor. But what caught my attention was a small, leather-bound notebook resting on the passenger seat, its surface worn with age. The officer handed it to me, his expression grave. "We found this," he said simply. I took the notebook, feeling its weight, its potential significance. Flipping it open, I was met with a series of entries, each dated but lacking any identifying names. The handwriting was consistent throughout. a neat, cursive script that spoke of someone meticulous in their documentation. As I scanned the entries, a chilling narrative began to unfold, a story of a life unraveling, of paranoia and fear creeping into the mundane. The final pages were filled with frantic scribbles, words overlapping in a chaotic tangle. Amidst the disarray, a single phrase stood out, repeated over and over. "They are watching." The words resonated with a familiar dread, echoing the sentiments of our recent days. A person had spiraled into madness, their fears consuming them until they could no longer distinguish reality from their nightmares. And now, their remnants lay bare before us, a testament to the fragile line between sanity and the abyss. The officers took the notebook, promising to investigate further. They reassured us that they would keep us informed, but as they departed, the sense of closure I had hoped for eluded me. The car remained, an unresolved mystery, lingering at the fringes of our lives. Days turned to weeks, and though the authorities continued their inquiries, the identity of the car's owner remained elusive. Our lives resumed their semblance of normalcy, yet the shadow of that vehicle loomed ever present in our consciousness. The cryptic message, the journal of a mind unraveling. It was as though these vestiges of another's despair had seeped into our existence, leaving an indelible mark. As time passed, I found myself drawn back to that moment, to the eerie quiet of the driveway and the mysterious car that had appeared unbidden. The truth, as elusive as it was, beckoned like a siren's call, whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered. And in the quiet of the night, when the world was still and my thoughts turned inward, I found myself wondering, had the car brought with it only the echoes of another's fear, or had it awakened something within us as well? A lingering question, unanswered and eternal, as the car remained, ever watchful at the edge of our world. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a vast ribbon of asphalt cutting through a landscape that was as monotonous as it was barren. The afternoon sun bore down heavily, casting long shadows that danced on the road's surface like playful phantoms. The air conditioner in my car struggled to stave off the oppressive heat, but the faint hum it emitted was a small comfort against the oven-like atmosphere outside. My hands gripped the steering wheel with a kind of mechanical precision, my mind lulled into a state of complacent detachment by the rhythmic thump of tires against the rough, unyielding road. I had been driving for hours, having left the small town where I worked as a freelance graphic designer. It was a nondescript place, neither remarkable nor memorable, but it was familiar, and there was a certain comfort in familiarity. My destination lay somewhere ahead, a city that promised new opportunities and a fresh start. But at that moment, it was simply a distant point on the horizon, a goal that seemed ephemeral and elusive. The radio played softly, a low murmur of music and static that barely registered in my consciousness. It was interrupted suddenly by a series of urgent beeps, followed by a voice that resonated with authority and concern. "This is an Amber Alert for the following counties." The announcement was one to which I had become somewhat desensitized, living in a world where such alerts were unfortunately common. Yet, something about this particular message caught my attention, a mention of a child who bore an uncanny resemblance to my own daughter, Ella. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden rush of adrenaline jolting me from the comfortable fugue state of driving. I reached for the volume knob, turning it up in a bid to catch every word. The description was eerily accurate. A child with dark brown hair, about 5 years old, wearing a pink jacket and blue jeans. It was the same outfit Ella had worn the last time I saw her, when she and my ex-wife left for a visit to her parents' house earlier that week. The thought was ludicrous, of course. Coincidences happen all the time, and I knew Ella was safe, far away from the location mentioned in the alert. Yet, an inexplicable chill crept over me as the voice continued, describing the suspected vehicle, a dark blue sedan. My gaze instinctively flicked to the rearview mirror, almost expecting to see it trailing behind me on the near-empty highway. The rational part of my brain dismissed it as paranoia, a trick played by an overly vivid imagination. Still, the nagging unease refused to dissipate, lingering like an unwanted specter at the edge of my consciousness. I tried to shake it off, focusing instead on the road ahead. But the image of my daughter's face haunted my thoughts, refusing to be banished by logic or reason. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the landscape, I decided to pull into a rest stop. The air was cooler here, the shadows longer and deeper, hinting at the promise of nightfall. I killed the engine and stepped out, stretching my legs and taking a moment to breathe deeply, hoping the fresh air would dispel the lingering tension. The rest stop was deserted, save for a single car parked at the far end, its windows tinted to obscure any view of the interior. I paid it little mind as I made my way to the vending machines, the clink of coins and the mechanical whir of the dispenser filling the silence. With a can of soda in hand, I returned to my car, preparing to resume my journey. Just as I reached for the door handle, a movement caught my eye, something small and quick, darting across my peripheral vision. I turned sharply, scanning the area, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Only the wind rustling through the trees, whispering secrets I couldn't decipher. I shook my head, blaming my nerves and the unsettling news for my jumpiness. I climbed back into the driver's seat, closing the door with a definitive thud. As I fastened my seatbelt, a soft tapping sound emanated from the passenger window. I turned, expecting to find a branch, or perhaps a stray piece of debris caught in the breeze. Instead, my breath caught in my throat. There, peering through the glass, was a little girl. Her face was partially obscured by shadow, but there was something familiar about her, an echo of features that tugged at my heartstrings. She wore a pink jacket, just like the one Ella had. A coincidence, surely. I lowered the window slightly, enough to speak without fully exposing myself to the eerie silence of the evening. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and even. "Are you lost?" The girl said nothing, her eyes wide and unblinking, as if she were seeing something in me that I could not perceive. The silence stretched thin between us, taut as the string of a violin waiting to be plucked. I felt an inexplicable urge to break it, to reach out and touch her shoulder, to to assure myself that she was real. "Do you need help?" I asked again, trying to coax a response from her. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture that seemed both innocent and unsettling. Then, without a word, she turned and ran towards the trees bordering the rest stop. The leaves rustled in her wake, swallowing her small form in an embrace of green and shadow. I hesitated, torn between the instinct to follow and the rational knowledge that chasing after strange children in isolated areas was unwise. Yet, the nagging feeling, the prickling doubt that something was amiss, refused to let go. I sat there for a moment longer, caught in a paralysis of indecision, before finally setting the car in motion, leaving the rest stop and the mysterious child behind. The road unfurled before me again, shrouded now in the deepening twilight. I felt the weight of the encounter pressing heavily on my mind, a sense of disquiet that lingered even as I tried to focus on the journey. The landscape grew more indistinct, the passing scenery reduced to a blur of color and shadow, as my thoughts returned, again and again, to the child's face. Night had fallen completely by the time I reached the outskirts of a small, shady housing development. It was an area I hadn't planned to detour through, yet something compelled me to explore its narrow, poorly lit streets. The houses huddled together, their shapes distorted by the darkness, lending the neighborhood an air of quiet menace. As I navigated the maze of winding roads, my headlights briefly illuminated a figure standing on the sidewalk. It was the girl again, her pink jacket a vivid splash of color against the muted tones of the night. She stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on me as I drove past. A chill ran down my spine, and I struggled to make sense of the situation. How could she have gotten here so quickly, ahead of me, and seemingly without a vehicle? It was impossible, yet there she was, as real as the road beneath my tires. I pulled over, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to understand what was happening, to unravel the mystery that seemed to have ensnared me in its web. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air washing over me like a balm, and approached the place where she stood. But as I drew closer, the figure blurred, dissolving into nothingness as if she had never been there at all. I stood alone on the empty street, a sense of vertigo washing over me at the sudden absence. I felt unmoored, adrift in an ocean of doubt and fear. Returning to the car, I sat for a moment, trying to regain my composure. The logical part of my mind insisted it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, conjured by stress and fatigue. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something supernatural was at play, that I had brushed against the very edge of a world beyond my understanding. With a heavy heart, I resumed my journey, the road now a comforting companion as I left the housing development behind. The radio played softly again, a gentle murmur that filled the silence like a lullaby. But even as I drove, the encounter lingered in my mind, an unsolved puzzle that gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. I reached my destination late that night, the city welcoming me with open arms and the promise of a new beginning. Yet, the events of the day refused to be forgotten, haunting my dreams with the image of the doppelganger child and the eerie sense of something left undone. In the days that followed, I found myself scanning the news, searching for updates on the Amber Alert that had sparked this strange chain of events. But there was nothing. No mention of a missing child matching the description. No reports of unusual sightings in the area I had traveled through. The world continued to turn, life moving forward with its usual rhythm. Yet I was left with a lingering unease, a haunting question that could not be answered. Was it all in my mind, a trick of light and shadow, or had I truly glimpsed something beyond the veil of reality? The doubt lingered, a constant companion that colored my perception of the ordinary and mundane. I found myself questioning the solidity of the world around me, the boundaries between the known and the unknown blurring in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. Even now, as I sit here writing, I feel the chill of that encounter, the memory as vivid as the day it happened. The little girl in the pink jacket, her eyes wide and knowing, remains etched in my mind, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, haunting the spaces between what we see and what we believe.